Imagine that a human population has lived away from Earth for 20,000 years. By then, nobody would remember Earth from experience. The homeworld might survive through recordings, inherited stories, and a history of the people who left, while the descendants themselves have spent hundreds of generations living somewhere completely different. After that much time, it is tempting to assume they would have become a different species. They might certainly look different from us. Lower gravity could influence how bodies develop. Radiation could create different health pressures, and generations of living inside enclosed habitats could change everything from diet to medicine. Their culture and language might change even faster, until people arriving from Earth found many parts of their society difficult to recognize. But 20,000 years on its own does not tell us what evolution would do. For a population to become biologically distinct, inherited differences have to build across generations, and those differences have to remain separated from the wider human population long enough to matter. If people continue moving between settlements, having children across populations, or introducing stored genetic material from Earth, that separation becomes much harder to maintain. Technology could also slow some changes deliberately. Artificial gravity might keep conditions close to those on Earth. Shielding could reduce radiation exposure, and medicine could correct inherited problems before they spread widely through the population. Another settlement might make very different choices. Perhaps gravity is lower because generating Earth-like gravity is too expensive. Perhaps radiation protection is less effective, migration becomes rare, or genetic engineering is used to help people adapt rather than preserve the bodies their ancestors had when they left Earth. After thousands of years, two human populations could therefore experience the same passage of time and still end up very different from one another. That is what makes the question more complicated than simply asking what humans would look like after 20,000 years. Evolution would be shaped not only by the environment, but also by migration, reproduction, medicine, and the technologies people choose to use. A population could become physically and culturally very different, while still remaining fully human, or it could eventually become separated enough for the biological distinction to become much deeper. So the real question is not whether 20,000 years is a long enough time for humans to change. It is whether a population living away from Earth would remain connected enough to the rest of humanity to keep those differences from becoming permanent. By the end of this video, you will understand how many generations 20,000 years actually represents, what kinds of pressures could change an isolated human population, and what would have to happen before our distant descendants could genuinely become a separate species. If you enjoy exploring questions like this with me, subscribing helps others find them too. Liking and sharing the video helps even more. Now, let's begin. "20,000 years sounds almost too large to hold in your head. It belongs to ice sheets, vanished coastlines, and people whose names were never written down. Yet for human evolution, calendar years are not the most helpful clock. Bodies do not pass genes forward once every year. They pass them from one generation to the next. If we use an average gap of about 25 to 30 years between parents and children, 20,000 years becomes roughly 670 to 800 generations. That is still a long span, but it is no longer a fog of deep time. It is a chain of families, each generation receiving a mixed set of genes, living through its own conditions and passing some of those genes onward. You can feel the scale by bringing it closer. Your parents are one generation behind you. Your grandparents are two. Keep stepping backward through parents, grandparents, and their parents, and reaching 800 generations would take you far beyond every family story anyone could preserve. Yet the biological process at each step would remain familiar. People are born with small differences. Some have more surviving children than others, and chance changes which versions of genes continue. Those two forces can slowly reshape a group. Natural selection acts when a heritable trait affects survival or reproduction under the same pressure again and again. Genetic drift is less directed. It is the change produced by chance, especially when groups are small or separated. A group can become genetically different, even when no trait gives anyone an advantage. 670 to 800 rounds of inheritance give both processes time to leave a mark. If the environment keeps favoring the same traits, selection can build small differences across many generations. If groups remain isolated, drift can push them apart as well. Neither result is automatic. Pressures can change, groups can mix, and many genetic differences do little at all. So 20,000 years does not guarantee a new human species, or even a dramatic change you could see across a room. It does mean evolution has had hundreds of chances to act, one generation at a time, across a span longer than recorded history. The next question is what kind of pressure could stay strong enough and steady enough to shape the people living through all of them? We know this clock is active because some human traits have changed within only a few thousand years. One of the clearest examples begins with milk. Most mammals stop producing much lactase, the enzyme that digests milk sugar after infancy. Many humans do too. Yet in several groups with long histories of herding, genetic changes that keep lactase working into adulthood became common. Ancient DNA lets researchers watch part of that change unfold. In Europe, the genetic variant now linked most strongly with adult milk digestion was rare among early farming groups. After cattle and dairy foods became important, its frequency rose sharply. By comparing human remains from different periods, researchers can see that this was not a trait fixed in Europeans from the beginning. It spread over generations, probably because digesting fresh milk gave some people an advantage when food was scarce or disease made water unsafe. A different example comes from the Tibetan Plateau, where the air carries far less oxygen than it does near sea level. Many Tibetans have variants near a gene called EPAS1. These help the body cope without producing the extremely high red blood cell counts that can make life at altitude harder. Genetic studies suggest strong selection acted on this region of the genome within the past several thousand years. The exact timing is still debated, but the broad result is clear. Sustained life at high altitude changed which inherited variants were more likely to continue. These cases also show why human adaptation can be fast without being simple. Drinking milk did not produce the same genetic answer everywhere. Some East African herding groups developed adult milk digestion through variants different from the main European one, as similar pressure met different starting groups and found more than one route through the genome. A group living for thousands of years under steady pressure would not remain frozen in its founding form. Its immune defenses, metabolism, oxygen use, body size, or timing of development could shift if passed down differences affected survival and reproduction. Culture and medicine could weaken some pressures while creating others, and migration could keep bringing genes back into the group. Chance would still play a part, especially in a small or isolated group. The clock can move. What remains uncertain is which conditions could keep pushing it in one direction, generation after generation, long enough to leave a lasting mark. Time, by itself, does nothing to a group. 1,000 years can contain many generations, but generations are only chances for change. Something still has to make certain inherited traits more common, while other forces mix the group and slow that separation down. That distinction sets a limit on any answer we give. Counting births can tell us how many times inheritance has passed from parents to children. It cannot tell us what happened during those passages. If people aboard a ship face the same conditions as people on Earth, exchange genes with them often, and use medicine to soften every strong pressure, centuries may leave less change in the body than the calendar suggests. The opposite is also possible. A small founding group begins with only part of humanity's genetic variation. Random changes in which people have children can then shift traits even when those traits offer no advantage. Biologists call this genetic drift. In a large group, chance tends to average out. In a small one, a rare variant can disappear after a few unlucky births, while another becomes common simply because its carriers happen to have more descendants. Selection adds direction. If radiation, low gravity, recycled food, new diseases, or limits on pregnancy affect who survives and has children, inherited traits linked to those outcomes may spread. The pressure would have to persist, though. A problem solved by shielding or medicine may stop shaping genes. A diet that changes every few decades may pull in different directions. Even a powerful pressure can leave a weak mark if tools removes it before many generations pass. Then there are the forces pulling people back together. Migration joins gene pools that were starting to separate. Stored embryos, or sperm, could introduce genes from another settlement or from Earth long after launch. People might also choose partners across habitats, move between ships, or use reproductive medicine in ways that weaken the effect of local conditions. Isolation is rarely just a distance. It is a system of closed doors, limited travel, and decisions about who can have children with whom. So the question we began with cannot be settled by adding up years and generations. The clock tells us that change has enough opportunities to happen. It does not tell us whether drift, selection, and isolation will keep pushing in the same direction, or whether medicine, migration, and deliberate choices will keep reconnecting the group. The next step is to examine those pressures one by one. Which conditions in space could keep separating human groups, and which breaks would prevent that separation from lasting? Our species does not split because enough years have passed. There is no timer that rings after 20,000 years and declares that two human groups have become different species. What we need to know is whether genes can still move between those groups. Scientists call that movement gene flow. It happens when people from one group have children with people from another, carrying versions of genes across the divide. Even a small amount of exchange can keep two groups connected. Their bodies may look different, and each group may develop its own adaptations. Those differences can still mix whenever the groups meet. Speciation begins when barriers make that mixing difficult, and keep it that way while the groups follow separate paths. A barrier might be geographic, like two ships that never meet. It might come from biology, if changes in fertility make children less likely. Social rules or tools could also limit travel, partnerships, or access to reproductive care. Smithsonian Human Origins describes human evolution through groups that separated, changed, and sometimes met again. Separation was only part of that process. When gene flow returned, it could blur differences that had been growing for thousands of years. This means two distant groups can become quite distinct without becoming separate species. They may differ in height, metabolism, bone density, immune response, or how pregnancy develops under low gravity. If people from both groups can still have fertile children together, this happens often enough to move genes between them. The boundary in biology remains open. The difficult cases lie between full connection and complete isolation. Gene flow can become rare without disappearing, and fertility can fall without reaching zero. Some pairings may produce healthy children, while others face higher risks. You would not expect one generation when everyone suddenly crosses a clear line. The barriers would build unevenly across many generations, with the label becoming easier to apply only after the separation had grown deep. For humans living beyond Earth, separation between breeding groups would be created, maintained, sometimes reversed by human systems as much as by distance. Ships could carry embryos, while settlements arrange migration and use medicine to preserve fertility between groups that have begun to diverge. Restricting access to those same tools could strengthen the separation. So time apart cannot settle the issue. We have to ask which barriers could survive repeated attempts to reconnect the groups until gene flow became too weak to draw them back together. Neanderthals had already followed their own path for hundreds of thousands of years when modern humans moved into Eurasia. Their bodies were different enough for us to recognize them from fragments of bone. They tended to be shorter and more heavily built, with broad chests, powerful limbs, and skulls shaped differently from ours. Yet, when the two groups met, those differences did not prevent them from having children together. We know this because the meetings left traces inside living people. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo published a draft Neanderthal genome built from ancient bones. When the researchers compared it with modern human DNA, they found that many people whose ancestry lies outside Africa carry a small share of Neanderthal DNA, commonly around 1 to 2%. These are not vague similarities inherited from a remote common ancestor. The pattern shows that modern humans and Neanderthals exchanged genes after their lineages had spent a very long time apart. Some of those encounters produced descendants who had descendants of their own. That point is easy to miss. A single hybrid child would show that mating was physically possible. DNA carried through thousands of generations shows that at least some of those children were fertile and became part of later groups. The exchange was limited, though. Neanderthal ancestry is uneven across the modern genome, and some regions carry very little of it. That pattern may mean certain inherited combinations reduced fertility or survival, and were gradually removed by natural selection. The two groups could exchange genes, but apparently not without biological friction. They were neither fully blended nor sealed away from one another. Denisovans make the family history more tangled. DNA recovered from a finger bone found in Denisova Cave revealed another human lineage, distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans. Denisovan genes later appeared in living groups, especially among people with ancestry in Melanesia and parts of Asia. Genetic evidence also shows contact between Denisovans and Neanderthals themselves. So deep divergence can exist beside occasional gene flow. Depending on which definition a scientist uses, Neanderthals may be described as a separate species, or as a closely related human group within the same species. The genes cannot choose the label for us. They show a boundary that leaked. A future human group could become just as hard to classify. If two groups had different bodies and mostly separate histories, while rare migrations still produced fertile descendants, when would that leaky boundary become strong enough to count as a lasting split? The label may be the least important part. Future groups won't need to agree on a species name before separation begins to shape their lives. They'll face a more practical problem. Can people from one group still join another, have children there, pass their genes into the wider human family? That exchange can weaken long before it becomes impossible. Two groups might remain biologically compatible, yet live so far apart that almost nobody crosses between them. They might meet only once every few generations. A few newcomers could have children, while most families continue within the group where they were born. Gene flow would still exist, but as a thin thread rather than a steady mixing of people. Civilization would help decide how thin that thread became. If travel stayed regular, groups that looked quite different could keep exchanging enough genes to resist a permanent split. If contact became rare, costly, or forbidden, smaller differences in the body could build across many generations. Neither result would depend on a single dramatic mutation. It would come from who meets whom, who can have children together, and whether those children remain connected to both groups. When two groups rarely meet, few genes pass between them even if they can still have children together. Travel and fertility care can keep that exchange going, while distance and restrictions can reduce it. Over many generations, rare contact may no longer move enough genes to keep both groups on the same path. There may also be awkward stages in between. People from two groups might conceive children easily, while those children have lower fertility. Pregnancy might carry different risks in each direction. Immune systems, body size, or the timing of development could fit poorly without making reproduction impossible. You wouldn't see one clear instant when compatibility vanished. It could narrow unevenly, with some pairings working and others becoming less likely to succeed. The hardest boundary, then, is not the day descendants look strange enough to receive a new name. It is the point when exchange becomes so limited that separation begins to maintain itself. By then, the argument over labels may arrive late. The groups may already be changing in different ways. Some contact can remain, and no generation can mark the exact moment of departure. What could make that exchange difficult enough to fade? The distances between human settlements, the choices made by their societies, or changes written into the bodies of the people themselves. A colony leaving Earth would not carry humanity in miniature. It would carry the people who were chosen, who volunteered, who passed medical checks, and who could fit inside the ship. Even if the group numbered in the thousands, it would still be a narrow sample drawn from billions. Whole family lines would be absent before the engines started, along with many rare versions of genes that no planner had meant to exclude. Biologists call one part of this the founder effect. When a small group begins a new group, its genetic mix can differ from the much larger group it left behind. A rare gene may become common simply because several founders happened to carry it. Another may disappear because none of them did. No new mutation is required. The difference begins with a passenger list. That makes departure an evolutionary event before anyone has children. Medical screening could narrow the sample further, especially if planners reject traits linked to disease. Geography, money, language, training, and politics would shape who gets offered a place. Some choices would be deliberate. Others would hide inside systems that seem unrelated to biology, such as who can spend years preparing for launch. You can see the human awkwardness in this. A committee trying to build the healthiest possible colony might also remove genetic variation that later generations need. A trait that causes trouble on Earth could prove harmless in another environment, or sit beside genes that become helpful under different gravity, food, radiation, or disease. We are poor at predicting which combinations will become valuable centuries later. The first settlers would also bring microbes, cultural rules, and ideas about family. Those things could affect who has children with whom, how many children people have, and which traits become more common. Biology would not act alone. The colony's institutions would become part of the environment in which its descendants changed. This doesn't mean the colonists would become a new species quickly. As the Neanderthal reminder shows, separated human groups can change and still remain compatible. The point is that the colony would begin on its own path at launch, because it starts with only part of humanity's variation. Every later birth would build on that first selective sample. That starting imbalance could fade, remain, or grow, depending on later births, new mutations, and whether people from Earth ever join the colony. And once the founding group is chosen, who decides which differences the colony should preserve, remove, or create? A colony can have 10,000 people on its census and still pass genes forward as though its breeding group were much smaller. Geneticists call this effective group size. It counts the people whose genes actually shape later generations, weighted by how evenly they do so. The difference can be large. Some colonists may have no children, while others have several. Some family lines may repeatedly join, leaving much of the group connected through the same few ancestors. A disaster, a period of low fertility, or rules about who can become a parent could narrow the genetic pool again, even if the colony's total headcount soon recovers. That smaller effective group gives random genetic drift more power. Drift is the change that happens through chance alone. A gene variant can become common because the people carrying it happen to have more surviving children, not because it helped anyone breathe recycled air, resist radiation, or live under weaker gravity. You can see the basic effect with a bag of colored beads. If you draw 5 beads, chance can give you 4 blue and 1 red, even when the bag began with equal numbers. Draw 5,000, and the result will usually sit much closer to half and half. A small effective group is like taking the smaller draw in every generation. Chance has more room to lean. Over many generations, some variants may disappear completely. Others may spread until nearly everyone carries them. Neither result needs an adaptive story, and that can feel strange because we tend to explain a lasting biological difference by asking what it was for. In a small colony, sometimes it was for nothing. It simply survived the repeated sampling of births and deaths. This also means that a healthy-looking census can hide genetic fragility. 20,000 residents descended unevenly from a few hundred founders may carry less variation than the number suggests. If the colony later expands to millions, growth won't restore variants that vanished along the way. New mutations will appear, but they arrive one at a time and begin as rare copies exposed to the same random drift. Selection will still act wherever a trait changes survival or reproduction. Yet drift can strengthen a harmful variant, erase a helpful one, or move a harmless one through the group before selection has much chance to respond. The colony's genes would so record luck as well as adaptation. And if chance can reshape the group without anyone choosing it, how much control would planned genetic changes really give the colony? The strongest protection against genetic drift may not be a better gene editor. It may be a steady arrival of people, sperm, eggs, or embryos from somewhere else. Biologists call this gene flow. When people from two groups have children, their genetic variants move between those groups. Even a small amount of exchange can slow the random loss of variation, dilute harmful variants that became common by chance, and reconnect a colony with a much larger human group. That makes migration part of the colony's life support system. Air filters protect the lungs. Water recycling protects the body from dehydration. Regular reproductive exchange could protect the group from becoming genetically narrow and remaining that way across many generations. A settlement on Mars might receive new residents every few years. A remote habitat farther away could store frozen sperm, eggs, or embryos from thousands of donors on Earth. Later shipments could add more samples, chosen from a broad range of families and ancestry groups. The colony wouldn't need to replace its group. It would need enough new genetic material, arriving often enough to prevent chance from sealing off one small branch of humanity. The effect could be surprisingly large because gene flow works across generations. A new arrival has children, those children have children, and the introduced variants spread through the colony. Repeated exchange can pull the group back toward the wider range found among humans elsewhere. It doesn't erase local adaptation or make every colony genetically identical. It stops isolation from doing all the work alone. There are limits. Frozen cells can be lost through equipment failure, radiation damage, poor storage, or a broken supply line. Stored material also isn't the same as living migration. New residents bring immune histories, learned skills, family ties, and the unpredictable mixing that happens when people choose partners for themselves. A freezer can carry genes, but it can't carry a whole society. Timing would matter as well. If exchange stopped for many generations, drift and selection would keep moving the colony away from its starting group. Later contact might still restore some variation, especially while the two groups remained able to have healthy children together. As the Neanderthal example reminds us, compatibility can survive a great deal of divergence. Still, gene flow can reset only what actually arrives and becomes part of future generations. A colony's genetic future wouldn't depend only on its founders or its editing tools. It would depend on whether the route back to other humans stayed open, and who ultimately decided which people and genetic material were allowed to cross it. Adults aboard the International Space Station don't need generations to change. Within months, their bodies begin losing bone and muscle, while the heart and blood vessels adjust to a place where standing no longer means lifting blood against gravity. These aren't signs of a new human form. They show that a body built on Earth expects a steady mechanical load every day of its life. The effects don't stay confined to one organ or system. NASA has tracked these losses across many crews. Astronauts exercise for roughly 2 hours each day, using resistance machines, treadmills, and stationary bicycles. Yet some still return with weaker muscles and lower bone density in the hips and legs. Bone is always being rebuilt, while older material is removed. Take away the repeated pull and impact of walking, and that balance can shift toward loss. Your skeleton isn't just a frame, it's living tissue that responds to use. Muscle follows a similar rule. On Earth, the calves, thighs, back, and neck work through much of the day to hold you upright. In orbit, those muscles have far less to do, even when an astronaut remains busy. Fibers shrink, strength falls, and the nervous system gets less practice coordinating movement under weight. When astronauts come home, some feel unsteady because gravity returns faster than their bodies can adjust. The circulation changes too. Without gravity drawing blood toward the legs, more fluid moves into the chest and head. The body reads that shift as excess fluid and reduces its blood volume. After landing, the same smaller supply must once again reach the brain while the person stands. That helps explain why returning astronauts can become dizzy or faint. The heart hasn't forgotten how to beat. The whole system has adjusted to a different load. Researchers at the German Aerospace Center have found related effects in head-down bed rest studies. Volunteers remain tilted for weeks, allowing scientists to study part of the fluid shift and physical unloading seen in space. Bed rest can't reproduce radiation, confinement, or true weightlessness, and volunteers still feel Earth's gravity. Even so, it helps researchers separate reduced loading from the many other stresses aboard a spacecraft. Much of this damage can improve after return, especially with exercise and rehabilitation, though recovery isn't equally fast in every tissue or every person. The adult evidence gives us a firm starting point. Gravity isn't merely scenery around human biology. Earth's pull takes part in maintaining the body we recognize. If reduced loading can reshape adults within months, what might it do while a body is being built from its earliest days? Adult missions can tell us what happens when a fully grown body loses much of the loading it has known since birth. They can measure change, test exercise, and watch recovery after the astronaut comes home. That evidence begins after the body has finished most of its growth. A child on the Moon or Mars would face a different test, with the Moon providing about 16% of Earth's gravity, often written as 0.16 g. Mars offers about 38%, or 0.38 g. No human child has ever grown from infancy through puberty under either condition. We don't have a medical record, a long-term study, or even a close Earth-based substitute that can show us the full result. During childhood, bones aren't simply getting larger, they're changing shape, adding mineral, and responding to the forces produced by standing, running, falling, and pulling against muscles. Those muscles are developing at the same time. A child raised in weaker gravity might build a body suited to that weaker pull, rather than an Earth body that has merely become less fit. The inner ear also has work to do. Early in life, the brain learns how signals from the eyes, muscles, joints, and balance organs fit together. That process is called vestibular calibration. A baby learning to hold up their head, crawl, and walk is teaching the nervous system what movement feels like under gravity. On Mars, every stumble and recovery would happen with less downward acceleration. On the Moon, a small push could lift the body much farther than it would here. Then puberty changes the experiment again. Hormones guide rapid bone growth, shifts in muscle, and sexual maturation. We don't know whether reduced gravity would alter the timing of those changes, their final outcome, or neither. Animal studies can reveal pieces of reproduction and development, but they can't tell us how a human brain, skeleton, and reproductive system would mature across an entire childhood. This is why adult mission data can't settle the issue. Adults show us how a completed body responds when familiar loading is removed. They don't show us what kind of body develops when that loading was never present in the first place. Perhaps children born on Mars would grow healthy and capable there, yet struggle badly if they ever visited Earth. Perhaps exercise and rotating habitats could supply enough loading during key years. We don't yet know the minimum gravity needed for normal human development, or whether one minimum could protect every system. So before a settlement can become a permanent home, how could anyone learn the answer without making the first children part of an experiment that cannot be undone? The most plausible differences would begin in the parts of the body that gravity asks to work every day. Bones and muscles would carry less load, while the heart would move blood through a body that rarely has to stand against full Earth gravity. Over many years, that could shape how tall someone grows, how their limbs develop, and how well they can balance or move under a heavier load. None of this requires a new kind of human or a sudden change in our genes. A child's body builds itself in response to use. Bone thickens where forces pass through it, muscles adapt to the work they perform, and the inner ear learns how motion and balance fit together. On Mars, those signals would be different from the beginning. The result might be a healthy Martian body that simply isn't prepared for Earth. That distinction would have awkward consequences. A person born on Mars might need a wheelchair after landing on the world their grandparents came from, not because they were sick, but because every step suddenly demanded more than twice the weight their body had learned to carry. Even lifting an arm would cost more. Walking to breakfast could feel like strength training. Body proportions might shift as well, though the direction and size of any change remain unknown. Lower loading could allow longer, lighter bones, but exercise systems, diet, habitat design, and medical care could alter that outcome. Rotating living areas might provide stronger gravity for part of each day. Clothing or training machines might add resistance. A settlement would be shaping development through its buildings and routines, whether its designers meant to or not. Reproduction may be the hardest boundary. Pregnancy depends on blood flow, bone minerals, muscle function, and a long sequence of physical signals that evolved under Earth gravity. Animal studies can reveal pieces of that sequence, yet they can't tell us whether a human pregnancy, birth, and childhood would proceed safely at Martian gravity. The uncertainty reaches from the parent's body to the placenta, the developing child, and the years after birth. So the likely divergence zones are close to home: stature, bone strength, movement, circulation, balance, and reproduction. They may be developmental rather than genetic, and some could be reduced by engineering. Others may appear only after generations of life inside the same low-gravity world. Gravity, however, is only one filter acting on those bodies. Mars also exposes every cell to far more radiation than people receive on Earth, and that pressure reaches beyond muscles and bones into DNA itself. Radiation is often shown as a bright wave passing through a body and leaving behind some dramatic new ability. Biology is far less generous. When high-energy particles cross a cell, they can strike DNA directly or break nearby water molecules into chemicals that damage it. The usual result is not a helpful new trait. It is a broken instruction, a cell that stops working, or a repair job that introduces another error. Your cells do have repair systems, and many damaged cells destroy themselves before they can cause trouble. That protection works remarkably well, but it isn't perfect. Some errors survive. Over years, the added damage can raise the risk of cancer, harm tissues, reduce fertility, or affect a developing embryo. A change that reaches an egg or sperm cell may also pass to a child. Knowing that damage occurs doesn't tell us which changes would persist across generations. Natural selection would still act on passed-down variation, but selection isn't a designer seeking impressive improvements. It favors traits that help people leave descendants in the conditions they face. Before that can happen, radiation has already brought a heavier burden of failed pregnancies, illness, and harmful changes. Many damaged cells and bodies simply wouldn't survive to pass anything on. A settlement could become genetically different over time. Much of that difference might come through loss and filtering, not the sudden arrival of new abilities. Shielding would so shape life away from Earth. Thick walls, water tanks, stored food, or layers of local soil could absorb part of the incoming radiation before it reached living tissue. On Mars, people could build below the surface, but each added layer would cost excavation, transport, energy, maintenance, and living space. Crews might also limit time outside, track each person's exposure, and shelter during bursts of solar particles. Even with all that work, some background exposure would remain. Radiation changes the evolutionary setting in two ways at once. It can add DNA errors, while the habitat determines how much damage people must endure. A heavily shielded settlement may keep exposure low enough that inherited change remains slow and uncertain. A poorly protected one may face stronger selection, along with more cancer, infertility, loss before any adaptation has time to spread. In that sense, the walls are part of the biological environment, just as surely as the air inside them. If future humans control radiation through engineering, which pressures would remain strong enough to change them across generations? For a settlement, the first test of radiation may not be how adults look after several generations. It may be whether those generations can happen at all. A community can survive many illnesses and still reach a biological dead end if too few people can conceive, carry healthy pregnancies, raise children who can later have children of their own. Radiation can interfere at every point in that chain. It may damage eggs and sperm, raise the chance of miscarriage, disrupt fetal development, or cause cancers during the years when someone might otherwise become a parent. Some harm would appear soon after exposure, while other effects could remain hidden for years. And because human reproduction already depends on timing, health, a limited supply of egg cells, even a modest shift could become serious in a small group. This creates a filter before natural selection gets much room to work. A DNA change cannot spread through the settlement if the person carrying it never has a child, or if the pregnancy fails, or if illness shortens the years available for parenting. The visible group would so be shaped by many losses that leave no visible trait behind. You would see the people who made it through the filter, not the embryos, pregnancies, or family lines that ended along the way. Cancer adds another burden because it can remove people from a settlement's chance to have children without producing any inherited protection. A tumor in one person does not teach that person's children how to resist radiation, for resistance to spread. Some inherited difference would have to improve survival or reproduction, pass to children, and keep helping across many generations. We do not know whether human groups contain enough of that kind of variation to build strong protection under chronic exposure. Shielding could keep this pressure low, which would be a success for the people living there. Thick walls, buried rooms, careful monitoring, protected sleeping areas could prevent much of the damage before biology ever has to answer it. Medical screening and stored reproductive cells might reduce the losses further. Yet those protections would also decide who is exposed when conception is attempted, and which pregnancies receive the most support. So the earliest inherited consequence may be less like a new feature appearing, and more like a narrowing of the family tree. Some lineages continue while others stop. If reproduction becomes the bottleneck, the next pressure comes from the settlement itself, who is able to have children and how those choices are made. An adult can leave a damaged room, take medicine, or wait for a safer time. An embryo cannot. Its first cells are dividing, copying DNA, and building the signals that will guide every organ that follows. A small error at that stage may spread through much of the developing body, or end the pregnancy before anyone knows it began. The same concern begins even earlier, with the eggs and sperm that must remain healthy before conception takes place. That makes reproduction a different test from keeping adults alive. Shielding may hold an adult crew's exposure within acceptable limits, still leaving too much uncertainty around eggs, sperm, conception, and early growth. The doses may be lower inside a protected habitat. Lower does not yet mean safe enough for a community that must produce healthy children again and again. Evidence from Earth orbit can only take us part of the way. Astronaut missions usually involve adults, last months rather than generations, and happen behind some protection from Earth's magnetic field. Animal studies can reveal damaged cells, altered development, or reduced fertility. Mice and fish cannot settle the full question for human pregnancy, and no human group has conceived, developed, and raised children across several generations under radiation conditions beyond Earth. We have pieces of evidence, but not the long human record that would show whether small risks build up, fade, or change with each generation. The germline raises the stakes further. These are the cells that become eggs and sperm, carrying genetic information into the next generation. Damage to skin or blood belongs to one person. A change in the germline may be inherited, which means the biological record of one exposure could continue in children who were never exposed to that same event. None of this shows that reproduction away from Earth will fail. Protected habitats, careful timing, healthcare, and stored cells may keep the risk low enough. The trouble is that we don't yet know where that threshold sits, or whether it stays stable through hundreds of pregnancies. A settlement cannot rely on one successful birth. It needs development to remain dependable across decades, including the rare failures that only become visible when the group is small. So the hardest radiation question may not be whether the first adults survive. It may be whether life can pass through its most sensitive stages without the margin shrinking from one generation to the next. And even if the walls solve that problem, the habitat behind them will create pressures of its own. In a sealed community where air, food, microbes, people keep circling through the same limited space, what begins shaping survival from the inside. The International Space Station is already a living habitat, even though it was built from metal, glass, wires, and carefully filtered air. Each astronaut who enters brings along trillions of microbes. They live on the skin, in the mouth, and throughout the gut, where they help digest food and train the immune system. Once aboard, those communities begin to shift. NASA's year-long twin study gave scientists a rare way to watch this happen. Scott Kelly spent nearly a year on the station, while his identical twin, Mark, remained on Earth. Samples collected before, during, and after the mission showed changes in Scott's gut microbiome. Many of those changes faded after he came home, which was reassuring, but the flight had still altered the small ecosystem inside him. Other station crews have shown changes in immune behavior as well. Some immune cells respond less effectively during flight, while dormant viruses carried in the body can become active again. These are viruses the immune system usually keeps suppressed without you ever noticing them. In space, that control can weaken enough for researchers to detect viral material in blood, saliva, or urine, even when an astronaut doesn't become seriously ill. The habitat plays a part because it changes almost every daily exposure. Food is limited and highly processed. Sleep is often disrupted. Air and surfaces are shared within a small volume, while filters, cleaning routines, and low microbial diversity decide which organisms remain common. The crew also lives under persistent stress, and stress hormones can change both immune signaling and the conditions inside the gut. None of this means the station is dangerously infected, or that every microbial change causes disease. The results vary between people, missions, body sites, and sampling methods. Most astronauts return without lasting immune illness, and many microbiome shifts move back toward their earlier state after landing. ISS missions are also short compared with the lifetime of a settlement. Still, the evidence changes what a closed habitat is. It isn't a clean container holding separate human bodies. It is a shared biological system with microbes moving between people, surfaces, food, water, and recycled air. The residents alter that system simply by living there, and the system alters them in return. A settlement lasting for generations would have no outside biosphere waiting at the end. Children would meet their first microbes there, and every illness would unfold inside the same living community. Which microbes would the habitat need to keep, and how could anyone tell when that unseen system began to fail? A colony's invisible ecosystem would be built through thousands of small choices. The crops people plant, the moisture in the growing beds, the food they eat, and the timing of filter changes would all favor some microbes over others. Even washing a wall changes which tiny residents survive there. The colonists wouldn't merely live inside this biological world, they would keep shaping it. That influence would move through every recycling system. Used water would be treated and sent around again. Waste could feed farms after careful processing, and air would pass through people, plant beds, and machines before returning. Each loop would remove hazards, but no practical treatment could make the habitat fresh and lifeless every time. The goal wouldn't be to remove all biology. It would be to keep a living system within safe limits. You might think of the work as gardening on a scale too small to see. Crews would suppress microbes that damage crops, corrode equipment, or cause disease, while preserving others that break down waste, help plants absorb nutrients, or support digestion. Moisture behind a panel might favor one community, while a change in diet favors another inside the colonists. Adjusting the habitat would also adjust the people. Then the loop comes back around. Microbes shed through skin, breath, food, and waste enter shared systems. Some return in water, dust, meals, or contact with other residents. Children would enter a living community assembled partly by earlier generations, and each new resident would add something different. That history would be processed and rearranged but never erased, so a greenhouse repair or new meal plan could echo through bodies as well as pipes. That is why contamination is too simple a word for this relationship. Contamination suggests a clean place invaded by unwanted life. A working settlement would depend on living communities from the start. Residents would manage them through upkeep, food, farming, and moisture control, then meet the result again inside their own bodies. Over time, the habitat's biology would reflect human choices, while later choices would be made by people whose immune systems and microbiomes had developed inside that habitat. We would be changing the ecosystem, and the changed ecosystem would be helping shape us. Once a colony has built a biological world of its own, who gets to decide when that world needs correcting? On Mars, a child's fever might mean something different from the same fever on Earth. The child's immune system would have learned from a different mix of microbes, foods, recycled air, medical treatments, and chemical traces. None of this requires a sudden change in the human body. It could appear in clinics as a growing list of small disagreements about what counts as healthy. A harmless Earth bacterium might unsettle people raised inside the colony. A medicine that causes few problems on Earth might trigger more inflammation there. The reverse could happen as well. Visitors might react badly to microbes that local residents carry without noticing. Even a shipment of soil, seed, or fermented food could become a public health decision rather than a simple delivery. That would make safety surprisingly local. Earth doctors might say that a certain exposure is well within accepted limits, while colony doctors see repeated illness after the same exposure. Neither group would have to be careless. Their patients could simply have different immune histories, built over years of contact with different living surroundings. You can feel how quickly this reaches beyond medicine. Schools would need rules for childhood infections. Employers would decide how long a sick worker stays home. Farms might face tighter controls on imported microbes. Travelers could be asked to isolate, take preventive drugs, or provide samples before entering a settlement. What began as a biological difference would become a question of cost, access, and trust. It would also change who carries the burden. If an Earth visitor needs special treatment to enter safely, should the visitor pay for it? If a colony resident develops a severe reaction after returning to Earth, which health system is responsible? And if keeping both populations safe requires expensive testing, wealthier settlements may be able to move people freely, while poorer ones become more isolated. The language of illness would shift too. A reaction described on Earth as unusually sensitive might be common among colonists. Something treated as a minor infection in one habitat could close a classroom in another. Each community would build its own sense of what a healthy body feels like, which symptoms deserve alarm, and which risks people are expected to accept for the group. Those differences wouldn't stay inside hospitals. They would shape immigration rules, family visits, food customs, work schedules, and the small courtesies people use around sickness. After a few generations, residents might not only live differently from people on Earth, they might expect different behavior from anyone who enters their shared biological space. And once health rules become habits, obligations, and signs of belonging, where does public health end and culture begin? A settlement's first alien feature may not be visible in its people. It may appear when someone misses a maintenance shift to care for a parent, and everyone around them has a firm opinion about whether that choice was loving, selfish, or dangerous. On Earth, many daily duties can feel private because large systems sit behind them. Water arrives through pipes. Food reaches shops. A hospital can lose one nurse for an afternoon without losing medicine itself. In a small habitat, the same absence might leave a life support check undone. Caring for one person could create risk for hundreds, so the community may give personal choices a weight they rarely carry here. Distance would press on family life as well. If travel takes years and help cannot arrive quickly, having children might be treated as more than a private decision. The settlement may depend on enough births to continue. Yet each new resident also needs air, food, space, education, and decades of support. No single family would carry that calculation alone. Birth rates, training plans, and limited housing could become public concerns, even when the choices remain deeply personal. People could also inherit duties tied to skills their community cannot afford to lose. A young engineer might be free to refuse a parent's work while knowing that nobody else can repair the aging power system. That kind of freedom feels different. You can still choose, but everyone can see the cost, and they may remember who accepted it. Risk would acquire its own local meaning. Earth might judge a repair mission reckless, while settlers see it as basic upkeep. Settlers might accept radiation exposure that visitors consider intolerable, because refusing it would threaten the habitat. Neither side has to be foolish. They would be measuring duty against different consequences, using rules shaped by different chances of rescue. Then comes legitimacy. Who gets to make these choices for people not yet born? A government on Earth may claim legal authority because it funded the settlement. The residents may answer that delayed instructions from another world cannot govern an emergency happening now. After several generations, Earth's laws could sound less like shared rules and more like demands written by people who never breathed the settlement's air. None of this requires the settlers to become a new species. They could remain close in biology to us while finding our ideas about family, acceptable danger, personal freedom, and political consent strangely careless. We might return the favor. The gap would begin in common sense, in choices that each community stopped thinking it had to explain. And if two human communities no longer recognize each other's duties as fair, what would still make them one society? A settlement on Mars could wait anywhere from about 6 to 44 minutes for a reply from Earth, depending on where the planets are in their orbits. That may sound manageable until an oxygen line fails, a dust storm cuts power, or a crop begins dying from an infection no one has seen before. The people standing beside the problem would have to act before Earth could even hear the first report. At first, this might look like a practical exception. The local commander shuts down a habitat module without permission, uses water reserved for farming, or orders everyone into emergency shifts. Earth reviews the choice later and accepts it because the settlement survived. Then another emergency comes, and the same local power is used again. A temporary measure starts becoming custom, not because anyone declared independence, but because waiting proved dangerous. Material dependence would pull authority in both directions. Earth might still supply replacement parts, medicine, software, and money, giving distant institutions real leverage over the settlement. Yet the people receiving those supplies would know which machines can keep running for another month, which safety rules fit local conditions, and which cargo delays could kill them. If you are making decisions from another planet, enforcing a rule becomes much harder when everyone on Mars knows it cannot work without their cooperation. That changes which failures a community is willing to tolerate. On Earth, a broken pump might close a building. On Mars, it could threaten the air supply for everyone inside. A settlement living with that kind of risk may give engineers, doctors, or habitat crews powers that would seem excessive back home. It may also punish carelessness more severely, require work that Earth considers voluntary, or limit personal choices during shortages. Those rules would grow from specific dangers, then remain after the crisis that first produced them. Communication delay would shape politics more slowly as well. Each time local leaders solve a problem before instructions arrive, they gain experience and public trust. Each time Earth sends an order that no longer fits the conditions, its authority becomes harder to defend. Control would not disappear all at once. It would become less usable, decision by decision, until Earth's formal power depended on people far away choosing to honor it. Distance does more than separate two communities. It changes how quickly power must move, and power that moves too slowly begins settling closer to the danger. We can see why local rule might become necessary without assuming that independence follows at once. Yet if those local decisions keep everyone alive, how long before the power to make them starts to feel like a right? 20,000 years of separate decisions could change something more personal than government. People on Earth and people living elsewhere might still be fully human, still able to have children together, yet no longer feel certain that the other group understands how a human life should be lived. That boundary would be hard to mark because it wouldn't arrive on a particular day. It might begin when each group stops recognizing the other's reasons. A safety rule that seems sensible on Earth could look reckless to people raised under a sealed habitat. A medical choice accepted by one community could seem cruel to another. Even a promise might carry less weight if the two sides no longer agree on who has the right to make it. Trust can weaken long before bodies become incompatible. People tend to cooperate when they expect others to follow shared rules, recognize the same duties, and respond to danger in ways they can understand. After thousands of years under different risks, those expectations may fail. The disagreement wouldn't need hatred. Confusion would be enough. You can see the human difficulty in that. Two groups might meet and find faces, gestures, and family bonds they recognize, while the social meaning beneath them has shifted. Each side could speak of fairness, consent, childhood, punishment, or care, but use those words for different practices. They might be close enough to argue and too far apart to settle the argument. None of this means biology has stopped. Bodies would still be changing under local gravity, radiation, diet, disease, and whatever choices people made about reproduction. Some changes might remain small. Others could build across generations. We can't know when or whether any group would cross the much stricter boundary in biology that prevents successful reproduction. Social separation asks for less. It needs only a loss of recognition strong enough to change behavior. It changes who receives help, whose warning is believed, which medical records count as reliable, and who is trusted to raise a child or share control of a life support system. Those choices could divide groups while their genes remained compatible. And medicine may complicate the whole process. Future people might repair harmful mutations, alter bodies for local conditions, preserve traits from earlier humans, or deliberately limit certain changes. The same tools could slow biological divergence, speed it up, or send it in directions natural selection alone would never choose. So the first unmistakable divide may not be a new species. It may be the moment two human communities can still understand each other's words, yet no longer trust the life those words describe. If medicine can reach into heredity itself, will it hold those communities together, or give each one greater power to become different? Medicine changes natural selection long before anyone edits a gene. In a closed settlement, some people would carry traits that make local life harder. They might struggle with low gravity, suffer more radiation damage, or react badly to something in the habitat. Without help, those problems could reduce their chance of having children. With help, they may not. IVF is one clear example. A couple who couldn't conceive without treatment may have children through fertilization outside the body. Embryos could also be screened for some inherited disorders before pregnancy begins. Screening can't guarantee a healthy child or reveal every future illness. Still, reproduction is no longer filtered only by which bodies happen to work well in that setting. The same shift can happen after birth. Someone whose bones or muscles cope poorly with local gravity might rely on drugs, exercise machines, powered supports, or replacement joints. A person prone to radiation injury might receive frequent checks, earlier treatment, and long-term care. Others may need lifelong help with blood pressure, immune problems, fertility, or bone loss. These tools do more than repair damage after the environment has done its work. They interrupt the filtering itself. A trait that might once have ended a family line can remain in the group because the person carrying it survives, functions, and has children. Prosthetics can keep someone mobile. Hormone treatment can preserve fertility. Dialysis, artificial organs, or drugs taken for decades may allow bodies with serious weaknesses to keep going. You can see the change without imagining perfect medicine. Selection removes traits only when they affect survival or reproduction strongly enough. If a clinic, implant, or daily treatment softens that effect, the trait may remain. The environment still applies pressure, but part of the response now comes from tools rather than the body alone. That doesn't make the pressure disappear. Machines can fail, supplies can run short, and a treatment that works on Earth may be difficult to produce far away. Nor does every rescued trait pass to children. A damaged leg isn't inherited, while a gene linked to weak bones might be. The result depends on what caused the problem, and whether medicine changes survival, reproduction, or both. Over many generations, this could preserve more human variation than the settlement would otherwise allow. It could also leave the group dependent on a medical system whose failure would expose many hidden weaknesses at once. People might seem well adapted because their clinics, drugs, and machines are doing part of the adapting for them. Once a community can choose which weaknesses to support, which embryos to screen, which bodies to redesign, who gets to decide what still counts as a condition to treat? On a colony, the answer may begin with a budget meeting. A council decides whether to replace an aging scanner, train another surgeon, or keep a costly drug in production. Those choices may look administrative, yet over enough generations they become part of the environment in which human bodies survive. The clinic isn't separate from the colony's biology. It becomes inherited infrastructure, much like the air system or the farms, except that it protects particular ranges of health. If insulin remains available, one human baseline can persist. If prenatal care is broad and reliable, another range of pregnancies remains possible. If rehabilitation is reserved for people whose work is judged essential, the protection narrows along lines set by policy. Access also changes the result. A medical system may be excellent on paper while reaching only the central settlement, families with favored jobs, or people who can wait months for treatment. The biological effect comes from care actually received, not from a standard written into law. Over time, that gap could influence who remains healthy enough to raise children, and whose conditions become harder to live with. If you lived far from the main clinic, a treatment that existed in theory might still be absent when your family needed it. Maintenance may have an even longer reach. A colony can inherit a surgical robot without inheriting the factory that made its sensors. It can store medicine without preserving the chemistry, skilled workers, and clean equipment needed to produce the next supply. Each generation must decide what knowledge to teach, which spare parts to make, how much energy to reserve for care when crops, radiation shielding, or water pumps also need repair. None of this means leaders can design the group with perfect control. Bodies are complicated, illnesses have many causes, and policy effects would mix with personal choices and chance. A small settlement under pressure may have very little freedom at all. Keeping one treatment alive could mean delaying another, and equal care may be beyond what its machines and workers can provide. Still, the colony's idea of acceptable care would become a physical force. It would help preserve some human baselines, leave others exposed, and shape which forms of dependence could safely continue. Children would receive genes from their parents along with the clinic's supplies, trained staff, care rules, and judgments about pain. If those standards can influence human survival for centuries, how could a colony change them without slowly changing the people who come after? A future colony would have to decide what it was trying to keep. That sounds simple until the choices become specific. Should it spend scarce time and equipment correcting poor eyesight, protecting bone density, supporting pregnancies, or treating conditions once managed easily on Earth? Each choice may be compassionate. Together, they force hard choices because no settlement can preserve every treatment and passed down need forever. Some choices would protect what colonists see as central to human life, such as clear thought, safe movement, pregnancy, and recovery from infection. Other changes might be accepted because they cause little harm, or because reversing them would consume resources needed elsewhere. A shift in height, skin, metabolism, or tolerance for local gravity could be treated as variation rather than illness. The awkward part is that people would draw that line while their own bodies already stood on one side of it. And the line would move over time. A trait that first looks like a medical problem could become common enough that buildings, clothing, food, and work are designed around it. Once daily life fits the trait, correcting it may feel less urgent. The reverse could happen too. A harmless difference might become costly if tools or habitats were built for bodies inherited from Earth. If you lived there, your idea of a healthy body would partly reflect the world your colony had managed to build. Divergence would record more than gravity, radiation, diet, and chance. It would also reflect decisions about which treatments remained available, which risks parents could take, and which differences the community learned to accept. Two colonies in similar environments could follow different paths. One might spend heavily to remain close to an Earth baseline. Another might accept local changes sooner, not through some grand plan, but because its clinic, farms, and repair crews could carry only so much. Neither colony would have full control. Genes recombine, development is messy, and people don't reliably obey plans made for their descendants. Yet repeated choices can still lean on the outcome, generation after generation, until yesterday's compromise becomes part of the group itself. Then we reach a harder test. The settlers may still look familiar, speak the same languages, and recognize one another as fully human. Preserving those outward signs of shared identity would tell us little about what happens when their biology meets. If people from the two colonies meet after centuries apart, can they still have children together? Can those children have children of their own? That gives us the clearest boundary in biology available. The two groups do not need to look alike, share customs, or even find each other familiar. If their genes can still pass between colonies through children who grow up healthy and remain fertile, then the separation is incomplete. Biologically, the old group still has a living bridge across the distance. This second generation is the key part. Two people may be able to have a healthy child even when their groups have drifted quite far apart. Yet, if that child cannot later have children, gene flow reaches a dead end. Horses and donkeys show the pattern in a sharper form. They can produce a mule, but nearly every mule is sterile. The parents could reproduce once, their groups could not truly merge. Human colonies would probably present a less obvious case. Fertility might decline gradually, with no single birth marking the split. Some pairings could work easily, some might require medical help, and others might fail because certain genes no longer cooperate during development. A few fertile descendants could still carry genes between the colonies, although the bridge would be narrow. This test also has an awkward delay built into it. Bodies and cultures can change for centuries before anyone knows whether fertile exchange has been lost. Each colony might develop its own appearance, diet, sleep cycle, diseases, and ways of raising children while remaining linked through biology in principle. The test stays unanswered until people from both sides meet and try to form a continuing line of descendants. Even then, biology would not give us a tidy yes or no, because medicine might allow conception where it would otherwise fail. Frozen reproductive cells or embryos from earlier generations could also restore genes that had vanished from one colony. A small number of fertile families might reconnect groups that had spent centuries moving apart. Technology would become part of the boundary we were trying to measure. And this boundary is deliberately narrow. Fertile descendants tell us whether genes can keep moving between groups. They do not tell us whether the colonies trust one another, recognize the same duties, or want a shared future. People can remain one biological species while treating each other as strangers. They can lose direct fertility while still claiming the same history and human standing. So, if biology gives us only one answer about their connection, what would decide whether either colony accepts the other as part of the same human community? Distance does not have to end gene flow. Two settlements could exchange very few adult migrants and still keep their groups linked through biology. People are not the only things that can travel. Frozen sperm, eggs, embryos, and other preserved reproductive cells could cross the gap even when almost nobody changes homes. That could help on worlds where a trip takes years, carries serious risk, or demands more fuel and life support than either settlement can spare. Sending one protected container might be far easier than sending several adults. A living traveler needs far more support than frozen cells, which have much less mass but still require careful handling. With assisted reproduction, that small shipment could become real gene flow. A child conceived from material sent by another settlement would carry genes across the divide without either parent making the full trip. If these exchanges happened often enough, passed down differences would have less chance to build up on either side. Both groups could remain part of one breeding network, even if most residents never met anyone born beyond their settlement. Embryos would carry a larger share of that connection at once, though they would also create harder decisions. A settlement receiving embryos would be accepting future children whose closest genetic relatives might live years away. Frozen sperm or eggs could mix ancestry more gradually with the local group. The human arrangements differ, but each method lets genes move when bodies rarely do. The exchange would not need to be constant. Rare transfers might slow separation if they added enough genetic variety to groups that could still have fertile children together. The required rate would depend on group size how reproduction was managed, which cells were selected, and whether transfers continued across many generations. A shipment left in storage would do nothing. The material would have to become part of living families. And the bridge could close. Radiation might damage stored cells. Equipment could fail. Settlements might reject material from outside, limit who could use it, or halt exchanges during a conflict. A freezer and a spacecraft can connect two groups biologically, while policy can separate them again. Biology would then depend on a chain of human choices, not merely on the distance between two settlements. Assisted reproduction might so preserve one species across distances that make regular migration almost impossible. Yet, if gene flow depends on working machines and willing people, who decides whether the link continues or is allowed to end? By then, each settlement would have reasons to close the door. People born there might see themselves as Martian, European, or something more local still. Their bodies could carry changes chosen for the place they live. Stronger bones, altered lungs, better protection from radiation, or traits that work well under a different day and a different gravity. Reproductive exchange with another group would no longer be a simple medical decision. It could feel like giving up part of what their community had become. That feeling would have biological consequences. Gene flow only continues when people and their institutions permit genes to move. A council might restrict imported embryos because they carry traits poorly suited to local conditions. Parents might prefer designs developed by their own doctors. Religious groups could reject certain procedures, while political leaders might treat reproductive material as property, leverage, or a risk to be controlled. None of this requires hatred between worlds. Separate interests may be enough. The pressure could also run in the other direction. A small settlement might need outside genes because its founding group was too limited. Another might value the shared human connection, or regard continued exchange as protection against disease and harmful inherited changes. Some societies could put that duty into law, keeping roots open even when relations became tense. Others might decide that biological independence was part of becoming a people in their own right. And those choices wouldn't be made once. Every generation would inherit the arrangement and decide whether to maintain it. A reproductive link that seemed vital during the 1st century might feel intrusive by the 5th. A group adapted to one world could worry that continued mixing would weaken traits its children need there. People elsewhere might fear the opposite, that allowing too much separation would eventually create descendants who could no longer have children together. No single disagreement would create a new species, but repeated choices about families and travel could gather into lasting change. If exchange stopped for long enough, genetic differences could grow until reopening the route became hard, then perhaps impossible. We might then find that culture had helped turn distance into biology. So the future of a shared human species may rest partly on whether distant societies still want that future. They would need to preserve more than frozen cells and transport systems. They would need rules people continued to accept, even after local identity became stronger than any memory of a common home. And if human bodies no longer fit every world, would those societies keep their links or redesign descendants for separation? Hereditary editing would change the choice in a basic way. A society could alter reproductive cells or early embryos, passing changes beyond the people first treated. That is a different kind of power from medicine. A treatment can help one patient and stop there. An inherited edit enters the lineage. If it works as intended, descendants may carry it without choosing it, may have no easy way to recover the body their ancestors had before. Selection and drift would continue through births, new mutations, and chance. They would now share that work with the families and institutions, deciding which traits to encourage, remove, or require. At first, those choices might sound protective. Settlers may want children who can process local food safely, resist a common toxin, or develop well under conditions medicine cannot fully correct. If an edit prevents suffering, refusing it could come to seem reckless. After several generations, though, we may struggle to say where treatment ends and design begins. Genes also rarely do just one thing. A change that helps in one setting may cause harm in another, or affect a trait no one knew was connected. The first edited children could not consent to that risk. Their descendants would inherit both the intended benefit and any mistake carried beside it. The decision would reach beyond individual families. If enough people received the same edits, a society could narrow the range of bodies it accepted. Traits once treated as differences might become defects to correct. If you refused, the pressure could become severe. Remain unedited and risk exclusion, or accept a permanent change so your children still fit the community forming around them. Even a choice that began freely might not stay free. Schools, employers, insurers, or marriage customs could reward edited bodies until refusal carried a growing cost. No single law would need to command the change if daily life made every alternative harder. By then, distance would not be the only cause of human branching. Institutions would help decide which variations continued through their plans, funding, rules, and enforcement. Once a society can shape the inheritance of people not yet born, who gets to decide what kind of human belongs in its future? One colony might answer that decision very differently from another. A settlement under heavy radiation could permit inherited changes that improve DNA repair. A crowded habitat with limited food might approve changes to metabolism, while a wealthy colony with stable supplies might reject both as too risky. None of them would need to agree. At first, these differences could remain matters of law and medical practice. One government might allow edits only to prevent severe disease. Another might also permit stronger bones, altered sleep cycles, or better tolerance of low gravity. A third might ban changes to eggs and sperm altogether. The biology would still be shared, but the standards around it would begin to split. Those standards could move faster than natural selection. A useful mutation has to appear, reach adulthood, produce children, and spread through many generations. An approved edit can be chosen again whenever a clinic treats a new embryo. If a colony decides that a trait is safe and desirable, doctors don't have to wait for chance to supply it. The result wouldn't be instant transformation. Most traits depend on many genes, along with nutrition, illness, stress, and development. Changing one part can also produce effects that nobody expected. Yet even limited edits could accumulate when the same rules remain in place for centuries. A small preference, repeated across thousands of births, becomes part of the group. Culture would shape the direction. A mining settlement might value compact bodies and strong resistance to bone loss. A colony built inside spinning habitats could face different pressures and accept fewer physical changes. Religious beliefs, memories of past accidents, access to clinics, and trust in government could all influence which edits seem acceptable. Two settlements with similar environments might still choose different descendants. And once a standard becomes familiar, later choices begin from a changed starting point. An edit considered extreme by the founders may seem routine to their great-grandchildren. Meanwhile, people from another colony may see the same change as reckless or forbidden. The gap between them would then be social before it became strongly biological, even when their starting biology had been much the same. Over time, separate rules could produce groups that look, function, and reproduce differently. Distance would slow contact, while policy gave each settlement its own direction alongside natural selection. If two colonies eventually meet again, will we still treat those differences as variations within one human family, or as borders between kinds of people? The first argument after that reunion may not happen in a laboratory. It may happen in a court, a council chamber, or at the door of a hospital. One person asks for treatment. Another asks whether that treatment can be passed to a child. A health choice could then become a dispute about membership. The argument would concern equal protection, family, and who defines an acceptable human body. We can use biology to describe the changes. Researchers can measure altered genes, compare immune systems, and test whether two groups can still have healthy children together. Yet none of those measurements can tell a government where to draw a legal border. A colony might grant full citizenship to anyone descended from humans, no matter how much editing followed. Another might require a protected set of traits. A third might reject the idea that any council has the right to define humanity at all. That last position sounds generous until you face a difficult case. Suppose parents want an inherited change that allows a child to breathe a different atmosphere, but also makes life on Earth impossible. Is the government protecting the child by refusing or trapping the family in a world their bodies cannot safely inhabit? If officials approve the edit, they are making a choice for descendants who cannot consent and may never be able to leave. The reverse problem is just as sharp. A settlement could ban an inherited change even when it prevents disease, because leaders fear that each approved edit weakens a shared human standard. People carrying the disease would then pay the price for preserving that standard. What begins as caution can become enforced suffering, while what begins as medical freedom can create changes that no future generation can easily undo. Power would shape these rules as much as science. Wealthy families might gain access to approved changes first. Religious groups might claim exemptions. Employers could prefer bodies suited to dangerous work, while military leaders ask for traits that make soldiers easier to deploy. Even a rule written to protect choice could become pressure once survival, status, or citizenship depends on choosing the approved body. The boundary around humanity would no longer be something we merely discovered in nature. Law would give it force through rules for citizenship, medicine, families, newcomers, and children not yet born. A person excluded by one settlement might still be welcomed by another. If distant colonies return with conflicting definitions, whose law applies when a child, a marriage, or an inherited edit crosses from one human world into another? Mars and the Moon look like places where human life could continue in a familiar shape. They have horizons, ground beneath your feet, and landscapes that can be mapped and named. A child born there could point toward a hill, a crater, or the glow of a settlement and call it home. Yet the ground also fixes the strength of gravity. On the Moon, people would live at about 1/6 of Earth's gravity. On Mars, they would get a little more than 1/3. No engineer can turn a dial and raise either world to the pull our bodies developed under. Once a settlement depends on that landscape, low gravity becomes part of daily life across every generation. Moving underground or building thicker walls may protect people from radiation, but it cannot change that pull. A rotating habitat offers a less familiar home. Its fields and houses might curve upward in the distance, while the sky is a ceiling built by engineers. Rotation pushes people toward the inner surface, creating an effect that feels like weight. By changing the habitat's size and spin, designers could aim for something close to Earth gravity. They might set sections to different gravity levels, though building such a place would be hard. A small habitat may spin fast enough to make movement dizzying, while a large one needs more material and careful balance. Its machines must then work for decades, because a failed bearing or wall would threaten the home itself. We don't yet know how well a whole group would live, grow, and age inside such a system. Still, the trade is clear. The planet looks more natural, while the constructed habitat may preserve a more Earth-like pull on the body. Mars gives settlers a real sunrise and soil under a pressure suit, yet it also gives every child the same reduced gravity with no clear way to escape it. A rotating settlement looks more artificial, but its gravity could be adjusted, repaired, or redesigned as knowledge improves. That difference affects continuity. If keeping human bodies close to their current form is a priority, the metal world may serve that aim better than the rocky one. If belonging to a landscape carries greater weight, settlers may accept physical change as the cost of having a planet beneath them. And once different settlements choose different kinds of gravity, how long would it take before visiting another human home became physically difficult? Leaving Earth means losing a great deal that Earth provides without sending anyone an invoice. The ground pulls on your body at the right strength. The atmosphere blocks much of the dangerous radiation above you, while also holding the pressure your lungs need. Water moves through oceans, clouds, soil, plants, and living bodies. None of this requires a settlement crew to replace a filter before breakfast. Away from Earth, those protections become machines, procedures, and supplies. Gravity may come from rotation, which means keeping a large structure balanced and turning for decades. Radiation protection may require thick walls made from water, rock, or other mass. The air must be cleaned and mixed, with oxygen restored and carbon dioxide removed every hour of every day. Water presents the same demand. A settlement can recycle it from breath, washing, urine, and waste. But recycling is never a magic circle. Pumps wear down, membranes clog, and small amounts escape into places where recovery may be difficult. Each loss has to be replaced from stored reserves or local material, assuming local material can be reached and purified. Medicine also changes once Earth is far away. A clinic can carry drugs, scanners, surgical tools, and trained staff. Yet every treatment depends on parts and skills that may not exist when needed. Even a common infection becomes more serious if the best antibiotic has expired or the only surgeon is sick. The settlement must preserve medical knowledge while producing at least some of its own supplies. Then there is reproduction. Supporting pregnancy, birth, infancy, and childhood beyond Earth would require more than keeping adults alive. Nutrition, gravity, radiation exposure, hormones, immune development, and emergency care all have to remain within limits we do not yet fully know. A rotating home may let engineers adjust gravity, but that only moves one part of the burden into a system that must keep working. This is why human continuity off Earth would remain expensive after the first settlement was built. Beyond launch and arrival, the cost would continue through labor, spare parts, energy, training, tests, and constant attention. Earth lets us inherit a living environment shaped over billions of years. A settlement has to rebuild selected pieces of that inheritance and then protect them without pause. People could do it, perhaps for generations, but they would be maintaining the conditions that make familiar human life possible. If every settlement must choose which parts of Earth to reproduce and which risks to accept, who gets to decide what counts as human continuity? One future spends heavily to keep people close to the human range we know. Settlements match Earth's gravity where they can, screen out radiation, manage air and food within tight safety limits, and watch for genetic changes that could reduce health or fertility. They trade with one another, share medical knowledge, and sometimes move people between groups. None of this freezes humanity in place. It simply holds change within limits that future societies have chosen to defend. That defense would consume energy, machinery, skilled work, and political attention for as long as people wanted it. The difficult part is that the bill might never disappear. A rotating habitat would still need repairs. Its shielding would still have to protect living cells, and a small group would still need careful planning. Even when every system worked, keeping distant groups linked through biology could depend on transport that remained slow, risky, and expensive. The other future accepts more separation. A settlement adapts its people to local gravity instead of building costly machines to imitate Earth. It changes bodies to tolerate stronger radiation or a different atmosphere. It allows isolation to shape genes, culture, language, and ideas of family. That path could cost less because the environment no longer has to serve the human body. The body is changed to serve the environment. Over enough generations, those decisions could produce people who were healthy where they lived but unable to live comfortably on Earth, or even in another settlement. They might still call themselves human, remember the same origins, and care about distant relatives. Biology does not erase kinship on a schedule, yet the physical gap could grow until reunion required medical treatment rather than a ticket and a place to sleep. Neither future happens by accident alone. Pressure from gravity, radiation, isolation, and small groups may begin the split, but institutions decide how much of that pressure people must bear. A society can fund shielding, transport, shared medicine, and genetic monitoring. It can also decide that those costs are too high, too controlling, or aimed at preserving a form of life that no longer fits its home. The deepest divide may so come before any new species appears. It begins when communities decide whether baseline humanity deserves continuing support, even when divergence is easier and costs less. Across many future generations, that decision would shape bodies, rights, and belonging long before anyone agreed on a new name. If two groups can no longer share the same world without changing themselves, what would make them separate kinds of human? There may never be a single day when people on Earth can point to a settlement on Mars or in orbit around another star and say that its residents have stopped being human. The answer could be yes in one sense and no in another, because humanity is carrying several different tests under one name. The first test is the body. Do these people still share the basic anatomy and inner workings of humans on Earth? Their bones might grow differently under weaker gravity. Their blood, lungs, immune systems and senses might adjust to conditions their ancestors never faced. Enough changes, spread across enough generations, could produce bodies that need different homes. Yet a changed body does not settle everything. People already live with wide physical variation, and no agreed measurement tells us when adaptation has crossed into another kind of human. The second test is reproduction. Can the two populations still have children together, and can those children have children of their own? Biologists often use that boundary when separating species, but human technology could blur it. Stored eggs and sperm, genetic repair, assisted reproduction, or edited embryos might preserve exchange after natural conception becomes difficult. The reverse is possible too. Two groups might remain biologically compatible while choosing not to exchange genes for centuries. Reproductive distance can be caused by bodies, choices, or both. Then comes the social test. Do the populations recognize one another as members of the same human community? Shared ancestry may support that bond, yet ancestry alone has never guaranteed equal treatment. Laws can grant citizenship across planets, deny it to altered descendants, or create ranks of personhood that biology never asked for. A population could remain physically close to us and still be pushed outside the human circle. Another could look strikingly different and remain inside it through family, memory, and mutual rights. These three answers need not move together. A lineage might change in anatomy while preserving reproduction and belonging. It might lose reproductive contact while keeping a shared culture. Or it might remain genetically close while a political border turns difference into exclusion. And that is why no magical species test can carry the full weight of the title. The biological boundary may be gradual, partly repaired by technology, and disputed by experts. The social boundary can be drawn much faster, sometimes by people who benefit from drawing it. Humanity, then, may not end at one line. It may separate along several lines at once, with bodies, families, and laws giving different answers. Before anyone finds a final name for our descendants, we will have to decide which differences change what they are, and which differences change only how we treat them. A person can be recognized as human in at least three ways. Their body places them within our biological family. The law grants them the same standing as everyone else, and the people around them expect a familiar range of needs, choices, and feelings. Those three forms of recognition usually overlap so completely that we barely notice them. They may not always overlap. A future population could remain close enough to have children with people on Earth, yet live with bodies altered for low gravity, radiation, or a sealed habitat. Biology might still place everyone within one species. Daily life could feel different enough that neither group knows what to expect from the other. That gap would show up in small encounters before it appeared in a scientific announcement. A doctor might not know which blood values count as healthy. A school might treat one child's way of learning as a disability, though it works well where that child was born. Courts could face people whose expected lifespan, physical strength, or dependence on implanted systems falls outside the rules written for present-day bodies. Rights would then carry more weight than labels. Does this person have full control over medical choices? Can they travel, marry, own property, vote, and refuse work? Are their children protected in the same way as yours? None of those decisions can wait for researchers to agree on where one species ends. Governments, hospitals, and families would have to act while the biology remained unsettled. Baseline expectations may shift even sooner. We tend to recognize other people partly because we can read them. A face in pain, a tired voice, fear in someone's posture. If future bodies display those states differently, recognition could become less automatic. That would not make their experiences less real. It would make empathy require more learning. The danger is easy to see. A group can be biologically human while law gives it reduced status, or while custom treats its members as difficult exceptions. The reverse is also possible. Descendants who have changed a great deal could still be accepted as relatives, citizens, and people whose lives deserve equal protection. So the first serious boundary may arrive without a new species name. It may appear in a medical form, an immigration rule, a marriage license, or the pause before someone says, "They're one of us." Science may describe the differences later. Long before that, daily decisions will already be deciding who counts. Humanity's future, then, probably won't divide along one clean line. It may spread like a family living in places that ask different things of the body, while each community keeps some ties and loses others. Many descendants could remain close enough to us that the word human still fits without strain. Some may look familiar, share children across populations, and recognize the same needs beneath very different customs. That continuity won't happen by itself. It will depend on people maintaining the conditions that support it. Regular travel can keep populations connected. Shielding can limit damage from radiation. Artificial gravity, careful medicine, and shared records can reduce the ways bodies drift apart. Laws and institutions can preserve relationships even when distance makes contact rare. These are brakes on separation, and future societies may choose to keep them working for centuries. Elsewhere, the brakes may weaken. A settlement might lose reliable transport, accept lower gravity as home, or alter its people because local survival demands it. Medical systems could take different paths. Governments might restrict migration or reproduction. Languages and customs could change until people from Earth and people from the settlement understand each other only with effort. None of those changes alone creates a new species. Together, across enough generations, they could make the old connection harder to sustain. So there isn't one answer waiting at the end of time. There are many possible populations, shaped by different pressures and different choices. Some remain part of a connected human network, while others become physically unfamiliar but still exchange genes with everyone else. A few may grow so isolated that biology eventually marks a deeper split. By then, culture may have drawn several boundaries of its own. Even the word human may stop doing one job. It can name a biological ancestry, a legal status, a shared moral community, or simply a claim of kinship. Those meanings can stay together, though they don't have to. A person could fall outside one definition and remain fully protected by another, or a society could use biology as an excuse to deny a relationship that history plainly preserves. That leaves us with a branching future rather than a verdict carved into nature. Human continuity can survive immense distance and change when people protect the links that carry it. Where gravity, shielding, medicine, exchange, and government pull populations apart, that continuity can thin. Our descendants may inherit our name, replace it, argue over it, or share it across bodies we would barely recognize. What lasts will depend partly on biology and partly on whether distant people continue to treat one another as family. "20,000 years from now, people born on Mars, in rotating habitats, or aboard distant ships may see Earth as the place their ancestors left. Hundreds of generations will have passed, enough for bodies, cultures, and inherited traits to move in different directions. Yet time alone cannot tell us how far they will go. Evolution responds to conditions, and those conditions won't act alone. A small founding population can make rare genes common by chance. Lower gravity may shape bones, muscles, pregnancy, and childhood growth, while radiation may strain fertility and inherited DNA. Even the microbes inside the body could change as sealed habitats develop separate biological communities. Those pressures pull populations apart. Human systems can pull them together. Shielding can reduce radiation exposure. Artificial gravity may protect developing bodies. Medicine can help people survive and have children despite traits that natural selection might remove. Ships carrying settlers, stored embryos, or reproductive cells can restore gene flow after centuries of separation. A settlement that preserves those links may remain biologically close to Earth, even if its people speak differently, live under unfamiliar laws, and grow into bodies suited to another world. That makes the boundary hard to see. Mars-born people could become tall, lightly built, and dependent on medical support in Earth gravity without becoming a new species. Two populations might remain able to have healthy children together while seeing themselves as separate civilizations. The social break could arrive long before biology offers a clear dividing line. Biology may never offer one. Species boundaries are often clear only when viewed backward across immense spans of time. Migration and reproductive exchange could blur the edges for thousands of years. We can't name the generation when a colony crosses a final threshold, because there may be no single threshold. Some unknowns are basic. No human family has lived through many generations in Martian gravity. We don't know how embryos would fare under the radiation exposure of a distant settlement, or how sealed habitats would shape immune systems across centuries. Nor can we know whether future societies would keep funding the ships, clinics, rotating habitats, and biological archives that preserve connection. The first decisive split might not come from nature. One settlement may choose inherited genetic changes that make life easier under low gravity or high radiation. Another may refuse them. If those choices continue for generations, engineering could create a divide faster than the environment would. The dispute over who remains human could become political before it becomes scientific. Would our descendants still be human after 20,000 years? Very likely, many would be. Some might look unfamiliar and belong to distant cultures while remaining within the same biological continuum. Others could move farther away through isolation, broken connections, or deliberate design. Their future would depend less on the settlement's age than on the ties it preserves. Human continuity wouldn't require every body to stay unchanged, or Earth to remain the only accepted baseline. It would require enough connection for separated populations to keep sharing ancestry, medicine, reproduction, knowledge, and some sense of a common future. Space will place people under new pressures while giving them ways to resist, redirect, or accelerate those pressures. Evolution will act, engineering will respond, and communities will decide which changes become permanent. After 20,000 years, our descendants may still be human in every biological sense while arguing over whether they remain one people. Humanity in space won't be guaranteed by ancestry alone. It will survive through the roots, machines, agreements, and care that civilizations keep building for one another.